The night my husband told me the baby wasn't his, the house smelled like boiled cabbage and old rain. I remember that detail because it felt so ordinary, so painfully normal, for a moment that split my life clean down the middle. He didn't shout. He didn't slam doors. He didn't even look angry. He just stood in the kitchen doorway, one hand on the frame like he needed support, and said very calmly, "I don't think that baby is mine." I laughed at first. A soft, confused laugh that escaped me before I could stop it. I thought he was joking, some clumsy attempt at humor after a long day. I was 43 years old, married for 18 years, and pregnant in a body I thought was done surprising me. The doctor had called it a miracle. I had called it a blessing. My husband called it a lie. I remember the clock over the stove ticking louder than it ever had before. Tick, tick, tick. I remember the way the steam from the pot fogged my glasses, and how I took them off with shaking hands, because suddenly I needed to see his face clearly. "What did you say?" I asked. He swallowed, eyes sliding away from mine toward the sink. I don't think it's possible. Not after all these years. That was how it began. Not with screaming or accusations, but with doubt, quiet, poisonous doubt, seeping into every corner of my life. Before that night, my life had been steady. Not perfect, but solid in the way you trust a chair you've sat on 1,000 times. I had married Daniel when I was 25. Young enough to believe love alone could carry a marriage through anything. We built our life brick by brick. A small beige house on a cul-de-sac, 2 children born right on schedule, routines that felt safe. Daniel was never a romantic man. He showed love in practical ways. Fixing the leaky faucet without being asked. Warming up my car on cold mornings. Folding the towels the way I liked them, edges perfectly aligned. He worked in logistics for a regional shipping company. Long hours, steady pay. I worked as an office manager at a dental clinic, the kind of job where people barely notice you until you're gone. We weren't the couple that held hands in public or posted anniversary tributes online. But we laughed together. We shared quiet Sunday mornings with coffee and the newspaper spread between us. We raised our kids with consistency, if not much flair. By the time I got pregnant again, our oldest was already in college, our youngest a high school junior. The house had grown quieter. I had started imagining what life would look like when it was just the two of us again. Maybe traveling, maybe finally repainting the guest room. The pregnancy came as a shock. I had missed a period, blamed stress, ignored the nausea until it refused to be ignored. When the test turned positive, I sat on the edge of the bathtub and cried. Not from fear, but from something close to wonder. Daniel didn't cry. He sat down heavily on the bed and rubbed his face. "At our age," he said, not unkindly. "Are you sure?" The doctor was sure. The ultrasound was sure. The steady, flickering heartbeat was sure. For a few weeks, Daniel tried. He came to appointments, nodded when the doctor spoke, told people at work. But something in him shifted, like a door that had been left ajar, and would never quite close again. He grew quiet, distracted. His laughter thinned out. I told myself it was fear. I told myself he needed time. The first real crack came at a family dinner. His mother, Lorraine, hosted Sunday dinners like clockwork. Roast chicken, overcooked vegetables, conversations that felt more like interrogations. That night, she watched me carefully as I passed on the wine. "You're not drinking?" she asked, eyebrows lifting. "I can't," I said, placing a hand on my stomach without thinking. "I'm pregnant." The table went silent. Then came the polite noises, ohs and wows and congratulations. But I saw the look that passed between Lorraine and Daniel's sister, Marlene. A look that lingered just a second too long. Later, while I was in the bathroom, I heard them whispering. "Isn't she a little old for that?" Marlene murmured. "Well," Lorraine replied, voice low but sharp. "You never know these days." I stood frozen, hand on the door handle, my reflection pale in the mirror. When I came out, they smiled like nothing had happened. After that, the questions started. Not directly at first. Little comments wrapped in concern. "Are you sure your dates are right?" Lorraine asked once, sipping her tea. "Stress can do funny things to a woman," Marlene added another time. "Hormones, you know." Daniel never defended me. He sat there, silent, eyes down, like a man watching a slow-motion accident he didn't know how to stop. The night he finally said it out loud, the night in the kitchen, that silence turned into something heavier. I followed him into the living room, heart pounding. "What are you saying, Daniel?" I asked. "Are you accusing me of cheating on you?" He ran a hand through his hair. "I'm not accusing you. I'm just asking questions." "What questions?" My voice shook now. "There are no questions. I haven't been with anyone else. Ever." He looked at me then, really looked, and for a moment I thought he might believe me. But doubt had already taken root. "We haven't, in a while," he said. "And suddenly you're pregnant." "We did," I said. "Maybe not every week, but we did. You know that." He sighed, like I was exhausting him. "I don't remember." That hurt more than anything else. The idea that our shared life, our intimacy, our history, could be dismissed so easily. Within days, the distance between us became a canyon. He slept on the couch. He avoided touching me. He started taking phone calls outside. And somehow, without a single clear conversation, his family knew. They stopped calling. They stopped inviting me over. When they did speak to me, their voices were polite but cold, like strangers forced into courtesy. I felt like I was on trial for a crime I didn't commit, carrying evidence in my own body. I suggested a DNA test. I thought it would end everything. Daniel hesitated. "Let's wait until the baby's born," he said. "No need to rush." I didn't understand then why he wanted to wait. I thought he was afraid of being wrong. I had no idea how many secrets were already being buried. By him, by his family, by a hospital error that would take years to unravel. All I knew, standing in that kitchen with the smell of cabbage still clinging to the air, was that the man I trusted for 18 years was looking at me like he didn't know who I was. And once that happens, something inside a marriage never quite heals the same way again. The days after that conversation moved slowly, like time itself had grown tired. Daniel and I began orbiting each other in the house like strangers sharing a rental. He took his coffee in the den now, door half closed. I stayed in the kitchen, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of his footsteps, trying to remember when silence had become so loud. Pregnancy does strange things to your emotions even under the best circumstances. Under suspicion, it turns every feeling sharp. I cried in the shower where he couldn't hear me. I pressed my hands to my belly at night, whispering apologies to a baby who had done nothing wrong except exist at the wrong time. At work, I tried to keep my composure. The dental clinic smelled of mint and disinfectant, the familiar whine of drills grounding me in routine. My coworkers noticed, of course. They noticed everything. "You okay?" Linda asked one afternoon as we filed charts. "You look tired." "I'm fine," I said automatically. It was easier than explaining that my marriage was quietly disintegrating between prenatal vitamins and unanswered questions. At home, the tension seeped into every corner. Daniel's phone never left his side. When it buzzed, he'd glance at it quickly, then step outside or into the garage before answering. I told myself it was work. I told myself a lot of things back then. The first outright accusation came from his mother. She called one evening while Daniel was out, running errands. Her voice was calm, clipped. "I think we should talk," she said. I held the phone between my shoulder and ear, folding laundry. "About what?" "About this situation," she replied. "I don't want Daniel hurt." Something in her tone, protective, proprietary, made my stomach tighten. "No one's hurting Daniel," I said. "I'm pregnant. That's all." There was a pause. Then she said, "Women lie sometimes, especially when they're scared." I stopped folding. My hands trembled. "Are you calling me a liar?" "I'm saying," she continued, "that at his age things don't just happen. Biology doesn't work that way." I laughed then, but it was hollow. "Biology isn't a clock you can read off the wall, Lorraine." She sighed. "We're just concerned." By the time I hung up, my chest felt tight, like I couldn't quite get enough air. I realized then that whatever doubts Daniel had shared with his family had taken on a life of their own. I wasn't just defending myself to my husband anymore. I was defending myself to an entire jury that had already decided my guilt. When Daniel came home that night, I confronted him. You told them, I said, standing in the doorway as he set his keys down. He didn't deny it. They're my family. So am I replied, my voice breaking. Or was. He looked tired. I needed advice. About whether your wife cheated on you? I asked. He rubbed his temples. I don't know what to think. That was his favorite phrase during that time. I don't know what to think. As if uncertainty absolved him of responsibility. As if my pain was an unfortunate side effect of his confusion. The pregnancy progressed, my body changing in ways that felt both miraculous and cruel. My belly rounded. The baby kicked, strong and insistent, especially at night. Daniel never touched my stomach. Never spoke to the baby. He existed alongside us, detached, like a guest waiting for proof before deciding whether to stay. At my 20-week appointment, the ultrasound technician smiled. Looks healthy, she said, pointing out tiny fingers, a fluttering heart. I felt tears slip down my temples into my hair. I wanted to share that moment with my husband, to feel his hand in mine, to hear him say we're okay. Instead, he sat stiffly in the chair, eyes fixed on the screen but distant, like he was watching a stranger's life unfold. Afterward in the car I said quietly, you can still do the DNA test now. There are safe options. He shook his head. Let's wait. I didn't push. Part of me was afraid of what waiting meant. Another part of me was too tired to fight every battle. The night I went into labor, Daniel drove me to the hospital in silence. The rain streaked the windshield, blurring the streetlights into long, trembling lines. I focused on breathing, on the ache spreading through my lower back, on the rhythm of my own body doing what it had done before. In the delivery room, he stood near the wall, arms crossed. He followed instructions when asked, held my hand when the nurse insisted, but his grip was loose, distracted. When the baby finally arrived, a boy with a full head of dark hair and a cry that filled the room, I felt something inside me break open and stitch itself back together all at once. He's beautiful, I whispered. Daniel looked at him for a long moment. His face was unreadable. Yeah, he said softly. For a brief, fragile moment, I thought the doubt might dissolve. I thought love might win simply by being present. I was wrong. 2 days later, while I was still sore and exhausted, a nurse came in with paperwork. She flipped through forms, frowning slightly. We'll need a blood sample from the father, she said. Daniel stiffened. For what? Routine testing, she replied. Genetic screening. I watched his jaw tighten. I'll do it later, he said quickly. We're in a rush. The nurse hesitated, then nodded. We'll note it. I didn't realize then that his refusal would set off a chain of quiet decisions, some made by him, some by others, that would haunt us for years. We brought the baby home. Daniel stayed physically. He changed diapers when asked. He rocked the baby when he cried. But there was a distance in his eyes, a hesitation in his touch, like he was afraid to bond with something he might have to let go of. His family never visited. At 6 weeks postpartum, Daniel finally said, I want the test. I agreed immediately. I had been waiting for those words. We scheduled it through a private lab. Blood samples were taken. Swabs collected. The technician smiled kindly, told us results would come in 2 weeks. Those 2 weeks felt longer than the entire pregnancy. When the envelope arrived, Daniel opened it alone. I found him sitting at the kitchen table, the same one where everything had begun, staring at the paper like it might bite him. Well, I asked. He looked up, eyes hard. It says there's no biological match. The words hit me like ice water. That's not possible, I said. There's been a mistake. He stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. So now the test is wrong. Yes, I said, my voice rising. Because I didn't cheat on you. He laughed, then a short bitter sound. Unbelievable. That night he packed a bag. He didn't take much. Clothes. His laptop. He paused at the door, hand on the knob, and said, I'll send child support when we sort this out. The door closed behind him with a soft click. I sank to the floor, my baby crying in the next room, and felt something inside me finally shatter. I didn't know then that the DNA test he showed me wasn't the only one taken. I didn't know about the hospital mix-up, or the second set of results that never reached my hands. All I knew was that I had been judged, abandoned, and condemned by the man I trusted most, based on evidence I hadn't been allowed to see. And sometimes, the deepest betrayals don't announce themselves loudly. They hide behind paperwork, silence, and the assumption that a woman will simply accept the blame. The weeks after Daniel left blurred together in a haze of exhaustion and disbelief. I learned quickly that heartbreak doesn't pause for postpartum recovery. My body still ached. My stitches pulled when I moved too fast. Milk soaked through my shirts at the most inconvenient moments. And yet, life demanded I keep going. Feeding a newborn every 2 hours, washing bottles in the quiet hours before dawn, rocking a baby who had no idea his existence had cost me my marriage. Daniel moved into a short-term rental across town. He came by once a week, always texting first, always keeping his visits brief. He held the baby awkwardly, like someone afraid of dropping a fragile package. He never stayed long enough to see him fall asleep. His family cut me off completely. Lorraine returned a gift I had sent with a note that read, "This feels inappropriate given the circumstances." Marlene blocked me on social media. Even Daniel's aunt, who had once hugged me at every holiday, stopped answering my calls. The isolation settled in like a second skin. At night, after the baby finally slept, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea gone cold, staring at the DNA results Daniel had left behind. I read them over and over, searching for something. An error code, a footnote, anything that explained how my life had derailed so quickly. No biological relationship established. The words felt final, absolute, and yet they didn't match my reality. I knew my body. I knew my marriage. I knew my truth. Or at least I thought I did. Friends urged me to move on. "If he doesn't trust you," Linda said gently one afternoon, rocking the baby while I showered, "that says more about him than you." I nodded, grateful for the support, but something inside me refused to settle. There was a splinter lodged deep in my mind, a quiet insistence that something wasn't right. It wasn't just Daniel's doubt. It was the way he had insisted on opening the results alone. The way he had avoided testing at the hospital. The way everything had happened just slightly out of sync, like a song played half a beat too fast. 3 months after the baby was born, I received paperwork from the hospital, routine billing statements, lab codes, itemized charges. I sorted through them one afternoon while the baby napped, highlighting amounts, preparing to call insurance. That was when I noticed it. A lab charge dated 2 days after delivery. Genetic screening. Paternal blood work. My breath caught. Daniel had told me he didn't give a sample at the hospital. He had told me we would wait. I stared at the page, my hands growing clammy. Slowly, carefully, I called the number listed on the statement. After navigating the automated menu, I reached a woman with a tired but kind voice. "Billing department, how can I help you?" "I'm calling about a lab charge," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It says paternal genetic screening, but my husband didn't consent to that at the hospital." There was a pause as she pulled up the file. I heard typing. Then, "I see the test here. It was processed and finalized. Can I have a copy of the results?" I asked. "I'm sorry," she said. "Those would have been sent directly to the ordering physician." "Who ordered them?" I pressed. Another pause. "The attending OB," she replied. "Standard protocol when there's a question of paternity noted in the file." My heart pounded. There was a question noted? "Yes," she said, then hesitated. "Ma'am, do you not have the results?" I hung up the phone with shaking hands. That night, after putting the baby to bed, I sat in the dark living room and cried. Not the broken sobs of the early weeks, but quiet tears of anger and resolve. Something had been done without my knowledge. Something that mattered. The next morning, I requested my full medical records. It took weeks. Forms. Calls. Delays. Each envelope that arrived made my pulse quicken. I read every page carefully, learning to understand lab codes, timestamps, signatures. And then I found it. A note entered into my chart by a nurse I barely remembered. Initial blood sample mislabeled. Corrected sample obtained. Mislabeled. The word echoed in my mind. I called the hospital again, this time asking for patient advocacy. I explained everything slowly, carefully. I told them about the accusation, the divorce proceedings Daniel had already initiated, the DNA test I had never been shown. The woman on the other end of the line listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said quietly, "Let me look into this." 2 weeks later, she called me back. "Mrs. Harper," she said, "there was an error." I sat down hard on the edge of the couch. "What kind of error?" "The initial paternal blood sample taken at delivery was incorrectly logged under your husband's name," she explained. "It appears it was swapped with another patient's sample during processing." My ears rang. "So, the results Daniel received were not accurate," she said gently. "The corrected results show a 99.9% probability of paternity." For a long moment, I couldn't speak. I thought of the nights I had spent crying on the bathroom floor, of the looks from his family, of the way Daniel had walked out the door without looking back. "I want everything in writing," I said finally. "You'll have it," she promised. "And we will be issuing a formal apology." The letter arrived a week later. Official letterhead. Careful language. An acknowledgement of error and responsibility. I read it once. Then again. Then I folded it neatly and placed it in an envelope along with the corrected DNA results. Daniel had moved quickly with the divorce. Papers had been filed. Custodie discussions initiated. He believed he was protecting himself. I waited until everything was finalized. Not out of spite, but because I needed the truth to stand on its own, undeniable, when it finally came into the light. The day I asked him to meet me, he looked wary. We sat at a small cafe halfway between our houses. He ordered coffee. I ordered nothing. My hands were steady as I slid the envelope across the table. "What's this?" he asked. "Open it," I said. He frowned, then unfolded the papers. I watched his face as he read. The confusion, the tightening jaw, the slow drain of color. He looked up at me, eyes wide. This says that the baby is yours," I finished calmly. "Always was." He stared at the documents like they might rearrange themselves. "But the test was wrong," I said. "Because the hospital made a mistake. A mistake you never questioned. A mistake you used to walk away." Silence stretched between us. His hands began to shake. "I didn't know," he whispered. I leaned back in my chair. "You didn't want to know." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. For the first time in months, he looked small. "What about my family?" he asked weakly. I thought of Lorraine's voice on the phone, of Marlene's blocked profile, of the returned gift. "They believed you," I said. "Just like you believed them." Daniel swallowed hard. "I need to fix this." I stood, picking up my purse. "Some things can't be fixed," I said. "Only faced." As I walked out of the cafe, the air felt lighter than it had in months. I had my truth. And soon, everyone else would too. Daniel didn't sleep that night. I know because he texted me at 3 in the morning. "Can we talk again? Please." I read the message in the dim glow of my phone while my son slept beside me in his bassinet. His tiny chest rising and falling in a rhythm that felt steadier than anything else in my life. I didn't reply. Not because I wanted to punish Daniel, but because I finally understood that urgency didn't belong to him anymore. It belonged to the truth. The next few weeks unfolded quietly, but the silence was deceptive. Beneath it, everything was shifting. Daniel contacted a lawyer. Not to fight me, but to amend things. Custody arrangements. Child support paperwork. His tone changed when we spoke on the phone, softer, careful, as if every word had to be weighed now. "I told my mother," he said during one call. I didn't respond right away. "She didn't believe me at first," he added. "She thought I misunderstood the paperwork." I closed my eyes. "And when she realized she couldn't explain it away?" He hesitated. "She cried." I pictured Lorraine crying. Not the loud kind, but the quiet, dignified tears she reserved for moments when she felt wronged. I wondered if she cried for me, or only for herself. "Does she want to talk to me?" I asked. "Yes," he said quickly. "They all do." I thought about it for a long time before agreeing. We met at Daniel's sister's house on a Sunday afternoon. The same place where whispers had once followed me down the hallway. The living room smelled of lemon cleaner and coffee. Lorraine sat stiffly on the couch, hands folded in her lap. Marlene stood near the window, arms crossed, her face guarded. No one hugged me when I arrived. "I'll get straight to it," I said, sitting down and placing the folder of documents on the coffee table. "The DNA test Daniel showed you was wrong. The hospital confirmed it. These are the corrected results." Lorraine reached for the papers with trembling fingers. As she read, her shoulders sagged, like a weight had finally been acknowledged. "I didn't know," she said quietly. "I truly didn't." "You didn't ask," I replied not unkindly. "You assumed." Marlene scoffed. "This is all very convenient." I looked at her steadily. Convenient would have been lying. Convenient would have been disappearing. I stayed. I raised a child alone while you all decided who I was without ever speaking to me. The room fell silent. Lorraine's voice cracked. "I'm sorry," she said. "I was wrong." The words hung in the air. They didn't erase anything, but they mattered. Daniel stood by the doorway, watching, his face drawn. "I failed you," he said finally. "I let fear make decisions for me." I nodded. "You did." That was all. I didn't stay long after that. Apologies are heavy things. They require space to land. The public consequence came not with shouting or confrontation, but with paperwork and truth moving through channels that couldn't be ignored. The hospital issued a formal statement. Daniel's lawyer submitted corrected documentation to the court. The custody agreement was revised. The narrative changed. Word spread quietly through the family, then through mutual friends. People who had once avoided eye contact now reached out with awkward messages. I didn't know what to say before. "I hope you're doing okay. I'm glad the truth came out." I learned quickly that vindication doesn't feel like triumph. It feels like relief, mixed with grief for what was lost while the truth waited its turn. Daniel asked to come to a pediatric appointment. He asked to hold his son longer. He asked once if we could try counseling. I considered it. Truly. But something fundamental had shifted. Trust isn't just about fidelity. It's about who someone believes when things don't make sense. And Daniel had chosen doubt over me. "I don't hate you," I told him one afternoon as we stood in the driveway, watching our son nap in his car seat. "But I don't want to rebuild what broke this way." He nodded, tears in his eyes. I understand. For the first time, I believed him. Life settled into a new rhythm. Single motherhood was exhausting, but it was honest. I decorated the nursery myself. Soft green walls, a rocking chair by the window. At night, I sang lullabies I barely remembered learning, my voice steady, my heart healing in small, quiet increments. Sometimes I caught Daniel watching me with something like regret. Sometimes I caught myself missing the man I thought he was. But healing isn't about returning to the past. It's about choosing not to live there. The final moment of reckoning came unexpectedly. A letter arrived one morning, addressed to my son. Inside was a handwritten note from Lorraine. "I was wrong about your mother," it read. "I let my pride speak louder than love. I hope one day you'll forgive me." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in a box. Not to hide it, but to save it for a time when it could be understood. Because some truths are too heavy for children. And some lessons take years to unfold. I didn't get revenge. I didn't demand public apologies or dramatic gestures. I got something quieter, stronger. I got the truth. And sometimes, that's the most powerful justice of all. In the months that followed, life didn't magically become easy, but it became clear. Clarity has a weight to it. At first, it feels heavy, like carrying a truth you didn't ask for. But over time, it steadies you. It teaches you how to stand upright again. My days settled into a rhythm shaped around my son. Morning light filtered through the nursery curtains as I lifted him from his crib. His skin warm and soft, smelling faintly of baby lotion and sleep. I learned his different cries. The sharp one that meant hunger. The whimper that meant tired. The quiet fussing that meant he just wanted to be held. Holding him grounded me in ways nothing else could. Daniel remained present, cautiously consistent. He showed up when he said he would. He paid support without being reminded. He learned how to change diapers properly. How to soothe our son when he grew overstimulated. I watched him become a father in earnest, late, flawed, but trying. We spoke more easily now, stripped of illusions. One afternoon, while we sat on the floor surrounded by scattered toys, Daniel said quietly, "I keep thinking about how fast I believed the worst." I didn't look up from stacking blocks. "Fear likes shortcuts," I replied. "It skips truth and heads straight for blame." He nodded slowly. "I don't think I'll ever forgive myself." "That's your work to do," I said gently. "Not mine." And I meant it. Forgiveness, I learned, is not an obligation. It's a choice you make when you're ready, or not at all. As for his family, the distance remained polite but firm. Lorraine sent occasional updates, photos of old family gatherings, messages that ended with "I hope you're well." I responded when it felt right. Marlene never apologized outright, but she stopped questioning me. Sometimes silence is the only acknowledgement people know how to give. The gossip faded. Scandals always do. People moved on to the next story, the next quiet drama unfolding behind closed doors. But I didn't forget, not out of bitterness, but out of respect for the woman I had been when everything fell apart. She deserved to be remembered. I went back to work when my son was 6 months old. The clinic welcomed me with familiar smells and routines. Linda hugged me tightly in the break room. "You're still standing," she said. "So are you," I smiled. On my lunch breaks, I sat in my car and watched other people pass by, women my age juggling groceries, teenagers laughing too loudly, elderly couples walking slowly but together. I realized how invisible pain often is. How many stories we carry without knowing. The hospital reached out one final time near the end of that year. Another apology. Another assurance that procedures had been reviewed, safeguards put in place. It didn't erase what happened, but it mattered that someone took responsibility. That too was a kind of healing. The hardest moments came at night. When the house was quiet. When the past crept in uninvited. I remembered the way Daniel used to warm my feet with his own on cold nights. The sound of his laughter before doubt hollowed it out. The future I had imagined growing old into. Grief doesn't always come from loss through death. Sometimes it comes from discovering that the person you trusted most couldn't carry you through uncertainty. But grief changes shape when you stop fighting it. One evening, as I rocked my son by the window, watching the moon rise pale and steady, I felt something unexpected. Peace. Not happiness. Not triumph. Peace. I had survived something that could have broken me. I had stood in the middle of suspicion, abandonment, and injustice, and I had not disappeared. I had not lied. I had not bent myself into silence to keep someone else comfortable. I had chosen truth. Even when it cost me everything familiar. That matters. Years from now, when my son asks about his father, I will tell him the truth, age-appropriate, softened by time, but honest. I will tell him that adults make mistakes. That fear can make good people do harmful things. That love without trust cannot survive. And I will tell him that his existence was never a mistake. Not once. Life didn't give me the ending I expected. But it gave me something better. It gave me myself. Stronger. Quieter. Unafraid to stand alone if necessary. And that is a lesson I carry with me into every day that follows. Because sometimes, the greatest betrayal teaches you the deepest loyalty to your own truth. Sometimes, when I tell this story out loud, people ask me how I stayed so calm. They expect anger. They expect revenge. They expect me to say I screamed or fought, or made someone pay the way I had been made to suffer. But the truth is, I didn't survive this by being loud. I survived by being steady. When the man I trusted for 18 years looked at me and chose doubt over truth. When his family turned their backs on me without ever asking a question. When paperwork and silence almost erased my dignity. I learned something I didn't want to learn, but needed to. Not everyone who hurts you is cruel. Some people are just afraid. And still dangerous with that fear. What saved me wasn't proving them wrong. It was refusing to become someone I wasn't just to be believed. I carried my truth quietly until it could stand on its own. And when it did, I didn't need to shout. If you're listening to this and you've ever been accused of something you didn't do, if you've ever been judged by people who loved you yesterday but doubted you today, if you've ever been abandoned in your most vulnerable moment, please hear me when I say this. Your truth does not disappear just because someone refuses to see it. Time has a way of pulling buried things back into the light. So hold your head up. Document everything. Protect your peace. And never trade your dignity for acceptance. I didn't get the marriage I thought I had. But I got my name back. I got my voice back. And I got a life built on truth instead of fear. Now I want to ask you something, from one woman to another. If you were in my place, would you have waited for the truth, or walked away sooner? Tell me in the comments. And if stories like mine remind you that you're not alone, don't forget to subscribe and support this channel. Until next time, take care of your heart, and never doubt your own story.